The Black Death, 1347 to 1351. The Black Death remains one of the most devastating pandemics in human history. Caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, which is linked to the bubonic plague, the disease was carried by fleas on rats that traveled along the vast network of global trade routes, most notably the Silk Road. Arriving in Europe via Genoese trading ships docking in Sicily, the plague swept through Europe, Asia, and North Africa with terrifying speed. Between 1347 and 1351, an estimated 75 to 200 million people died. In Europe alone, the pandemic wiped out nearly one-third of the entire population. The death toll was so severe that entire villages disappeared from the map, and mass graves became the only way to process the dead. Beyond the staggering loss of life, the Black Death fundamentally altered the course of history. The sudden, massive shortage of labor gave surviving peasants unprecedented bargaining power, effectively accelerating the end of the feudal system and permanently changing Europe's economic and social structure. World War II, 1939 to 1945. World War II stands as the deadliest and most widespread conflict in recorded history, involving dozens of nations, split into two opposing military alliances, the Allies and the Axis. Spanning the globe, the war resulted in an estimated 70 to 85 million fatalities, representing roughly 3% of the 1940 world population. Unlike previous conflicts, World War II saw massive, deliberate targeting of civilian populations through strategic bombing campaigns, starvation, and disease. It left a trail of global destruction across Europe, Asia, and the Pacific. And at the dark heart of this conflict was the Holocaust, the systematic state-sponsored genocide orchestrated by Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime, which resulted in the murder of 6 million Jewish people, as well as millions of others, including Romani people, Soviet prisoners of war, and disabled individuals. The Spanish flu pandemic, 1918 to 1920. Emerging near the end of World War I, the 1918 influenza pandemic, commonly known as the Spanish flu, swept across a world already ravaged by global conflict. The movement of massive armies in cramped, unsanitary conditions created the perfect breeding ground for the H1N1 virus. It infected an estimated 500 million people, roughly one-third of the global population at the time. What made the Spanish flu particularly terrifying was its unusually high mortality rate among healthy young adults, rather than the very old or very young. The virus triggered an overreaction of the immune system, causing the lungs to fill with fluid. Hospitals and medical facilities worldwide were completely overwhelmed. By the time the pandemic subsided in 1920, it had claimed an estimated 50 million lives, making it one of the deadliest natural disasters in human history. The Great Chinese Famine, 1959 to 1961. The Great Chinese Famine is widely considered one of the worst man-made disasters and the deadliest famine ever recorded. It occurred under the leadership of Chairman Mao Zedong, largely as a direct result of the socio-economic campaign known as the Great Leap Forward. The policies aimed to rapidly transform China from an agrarian economy into a communist society through rapid industrialization and agricultural collectivization. Peasant farmers were forced onto massive communes. Private land ownership was abolished, and unproven agricultural techniques were mandated. Combined with poor weather conditions and the diversion of agricultural labor to inefficient steel production, crop yields collapsed. Local officials, fearing punishment, heavily exaggerated their harvest reports, leading the state to take what little grain existed. Between 15 and 45 million people starved to death in just 3 years. The Rwandan genocide. In one of the fastest and most brutal genocides in modern history, an estimated 800,000 people were slaughtered in Rwanda over the course of just 100 days in the spring and summer of 1994. The violence was orchestrated by Hutu extremist leaders who utilized state radio to broadcast hate speech, effectively mobilizing civilian death squads known as the Interahamwe to murder their neighbors. The primary targets were members of the Tutsi minority, though moderate Hutus who refused to participate in the killings were also massacred. The violence was largely carried out with machetes and small arms, making it an intensely intimate and localized slaughter. The international community, including the United Nations, faced severe criticism for its failure to intervene and stop the genocide, leaving a deep scar on global humanitarian policy. The Atlantic slave trade spanning over 4 centuries, from the 16th to the 19th century, the Atlantic slave trade was a brutal system of human trafficking that forcibly transported an estimated 12 to 15 million African men, women, and children across the Atlantic Ocean to the Americas. This enterprise was driven by the massive demand for labor on European colonial plantations, producing sugar, tobacco, and cotton. The journey across the ocean, known as the Middle Passage, was a nightmare of overcrowding, disease, malnutrition, and horrific abuse. Millions died before ever reaching the shores of the New World. The sheer scale of this forced migration permanently destabilized entire societies across the African continent, stunting economic and demographic growth. Simultaneously, it violently reshaped the demographics, economies, and cultures of the Americas, leaving a legacy of systemic racism and inequality that persists today. The Chernobyl disaster, 1986. On April 26, 1986, reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in the Ukrainian SSR exploded during a flawed safety test. It remains the worst nuclear power accident in history in terms of both cost and casualties. The massive explosion and subsequent open-air reactor core fire released massive quantities of radioactive contamination into the atmosphere, which spread across the Western Soviet Union and Europe. 2 plant workers died immediately from the blast, and dozens of first responders died in the following weeks from acute radiation syndrome. The long-term health effects, including dramatic spikes in thyroid cancer among children in the region, affected thousands. The disaster forced the permanent evacuation of the nearby city of Pripyat and led to the creation of a 1,000 square mile exclusion zone that remains largely uninhabitable today. The 2004 Indian Ocean earthquake and tsunami. On the morning of December 26, 2004, a massive undersea megathrust earthquake, registering a magnitude of 9.1 to 9.3, struck off the coast of Sumatra, Indonesia. The violent upward thrust of the ocean floor displaced massive volumes of water, generating a series of devastating tsunamis that radiated outward across the Indian Ocean. Waves reaching up to 100 feet high slammed into the coastlines of 14 countries. Indonesia was the hardest hit, followed by Sri Lanka, India, and Thailand. Entire coastal communities were instantly swept away. With over 230,000 dead or missing, it is one of the deadliest natural disasters ever recorded. The unprecedented scale of the tragedy prompted a massive global humanitarian response and led to the eventual establishment of an early warning system in the Indian Ocean. The Armenian Genocide, 1915. Beginning in 1915, the government of the Ottoman Empire embarked on the systematic extermination and mass deportation of its minority Armenian population from their historic homeland within the territory constituting present-day Turkey. Under the cover of World War I, Ottoman authorities arrested and executed Armenian intellectuals and community leaders. This was followed by the forced relocation of ordinary Armenians, men, women, and children, who were driven into the Syrian desert on brutal death marches. They were subjected to starvation, exhaustion, disease, and massacres by military escorts and local militias. An estimated 1.5 million Armenians perished. This event is widely recognized by historians as one of the first modern genocides, though the modern state of Turkey continues to deny that the events constituted a systematic campaign of extermination. Hiroshima and Nagasaki atomic bombings, 1945. In August 1945, the United States detonated 2 atomic bombs over the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, marking the first and only use of nuclear weapons in armed conflict. On August 6th, the bomb Little Boy was dropped on Hiroshima, instantly destroying the city center and killing an estimated 70,000 to 140,000 people. 3 days later, Fat Man was dropped on Nagasaki, killing an estimated 39,000 to 80,000 people. The victims included military personnel, but were overwhelmingly civilians. Tens of thousands more died in the following months and years from severe burns and radiation poisoning. The bombings precipitated the unconditional surrender of Imperial Japan, bringing World War II to a close. But they also ushered humanity into the terrifying reality of the atomic age, where the total destruction of civilization became a tangible possibility. The Titanic sinking, 1912. The sinking of the RMS Titanic is one of the most famous maritime disasters in history, serving as a profound cautionary tale about human hubris and the limitations of technology. On the night of April 14, 1912, during its maiden voyage from Southampton to New York City, the supposedly unsinkable luxury ocean liner struck an iceberg in the frigid waters of the North Atlantic. Despite receiving numerous ice warnings, the ship was traveling at near top speed. Crucially, the ship carried only enough lifeboats for about half of the estimated 2,224 passengers and crew on board. As the ship sank over the course of 2 hours and 40 minutes, chaos and strict adherence to class divisions resulted in the deaths of over 1,500 people, mostly from hypothermia in the freezing ocean. The tragedy led to sweeping changes in international maritime law, including the creation of the International Ice Patrol and strict regulations regarding lifeboat capacities. The Bhopal gas tragedy, 1984. On the night of December 2nd to 3rd, 1984, the city of Bhopal, India, became the site of the world's worst industrial disaster. A massive leak of highly toxic methyl isocyanate, MIC gas, occurred at a pesticide plant owned by the American corporation Union Carbide. A combination of poor maintenance, failing safety systems, and inadequate training allowed water to enter a tank containing the chemical, causing a violent exothermic reaction. A dense cloud of deadly gas drifted over the densely populated slums surrounding the plant as people slept. But thousands died within the first few days from choking pulmonary edema and panic. Hundreds of thousands more were exposed to the gas, suffering from severe, lifelong health effects, including blindness, respiratory failure, and severe birth defects in subsequent generations. The September 11th attacks, 2001. On the morning of September 11th, 2001, 19 militants associated with the Islamic extremist group Al-Qaeda hijacked 4 commercial airplanes in a coordinated terrorist attack against the United States. 2 planes were flown directly into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City, causing both massive 110-story buildings to collapse. A 3rd plane struck the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia. A 4th plane, Flight 93, crashed into a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, shortly after passengers heroically fought back against the hijackers. The attacks killed nearly 3,000 people from 93 different nations. 9/11 profoundly traumatized the American public and fundamentally altered global geopolitics, triggering the US-led War on Terror, the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq, and sweeping changes to domestic security and surveillance laws worldwide. The Haiti earthquake, 2010. On January 12, 2010, a catastrophic magnitude 7.0 earthquake struck the Caribbean nation of Haiti, with its epicenter located just 16 miles from the densely populated capital city of Port-au-Prince. Haiti, already the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, suffered from poorly constructed infrastructure that could not withstand the seismic shock. The results were apocalyptic. Over 200,000 people were killed, and an estimated 1.5 million were left entirely homeless. Essential infrastructure, including hospitals, communication networks, and the national government headquarters, completely collapsed, severely hampering initial rescue and relief efforts. The disaster created an ongoing humanitarian crisis, compounded by subsequent cholera outbreaks and political instability, from which the nation is still struggling to recover over a decade later. COVID-19 pandemic, 2019 to 2023. Emerging in late 2019, the novel coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2, rapidly spread across the globe, causing the COVID-19 pandemic. It became the defining global health crisis of the 21st century. The virus caused millions of confirmed deaths worldwide, completely overwhelming healthcare systems in both developing and highly developed nations. To slow the spread of the airborne virus, governments instituted unprecedented measures, including border closures, travel bans, and massive societal lockdowns. The pandemic caused severe global economic disruption, shattering supply chains, closing businesses, and triggering widespread job losses. However, the crisis also spurred incredible scientific collaboration, leading to the fastest development and rollout of vaccines in human history. The long-term impacts of the pandemic on global policy, remote work culture, mental health, and international relations will be felt for generations.